people working for now, and there are more companies developing more work. One statistic shows a 3,000% growth in recreational and professional circus in Scotland this century, and since in 2004 there were only 2 professional aerial artists, whereas now apparently there are 105 and 17 companies that are focused on aerial work. And actually the last couple of years have in a way seen a real connection made for both articulation but also for the sector. The move online and the wonderful kind of meetings that we and other organizations have been able to create really have joined the sector and given us a feeling of unity and consolidation that possibly hasn't been there for a long time. And as we move back towards live performance, it's clear that work outdoors and work in non-conventional settings is going to have significant advantages over indoor work for a considerable period of time. And I think we at Articulation are really keen to champion this and see how we can support the sector being right at the vanguard of the kind of cultural recovery over the next few years. And our hope with Articulation and the funding that we've got this year is that we can work behind the scenes to continue to create and develop these networks, to continue to encourage connections between artists and promoters, and to continue to champion the sector, both within itself, within Scotland, but also wider and further afield, in the hope that as we go forward, we really can develop a thriving and beautiful sector for Scotland. Just a couple so to move on to slightly more practical bits, at the end, the last session of the Moving Out Symposium at 12:30 is the Scottish Outdoor Arts Platform. And this is a bit that Articulation has taken the lead on. And for those who will be able to join us for that final session, what you will get is a pitching and platforming event connecting artists with promoters. And my video has gone very strange all of a sudden, but that's fine. Yeah, and so what we'll hopefully see is, I think, 10 different companies, artists, promoters, explaining their offer, explaining their work, explaining their connections, and really trying to, further those connections. So it would be wonderful if people could stay for those, hear the pitches, and possibly continue the conversations afterwards. The other thing to look out for is that in the next couple of weeks, we'll also be publishing the Scottish Outdoor Arts Index, which will be a database of all the works available to be performed in Scotland over the next year, and venues that are interested in receiving it, and freelancers and professionals who have the skills and expertise to help make this work happen. So although it's officially too late to be part of that index, if you want to receive a copy, please do get in touch with me. And if you're desperate to be included in the index, please email me and we'll see what we can do. But yeah, our ambition, I've only been in post for, and very much I've been kind of focusing on this event, but we are keen to see how we can further the connections, further the purpose of the Articulation. So I'm really keen to talk to anyone who has got ideas, who has got issues they think could be addressed, or they've got things that they think Articulation could help with. So please do get in touch with me, and I'll put my information in chat just now. So please do sign up for our newsletter if you want to receive the Outdoor Arts Index. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing you all at 12:30 for the Scottish Outdoor Arts Platform. Thank you very much. And over to someone else, I think.
Hi, Stella, are you there? Stella?
Thank you, host, for unmuting me. I was all set to thank Martin for that highly energetic introduction. So great to have Martin there, connecting, supporting and encouraging the sector in Scotland and of course beyond, as we open out to our wider cultural partners. So now I'd like to move on to the first section, which is looking at presenting work, the challenges for producers and festival directors in presenting work during and beyond COVID. What did we learn over the last 15, 18 months? And what do we take from that? And having gone through it ourselves at Festival of Thrift, there are certainly changes that we've made. I'm going to introduce first Alan Richardson, who madly, during a live festival, after going online last year, has opted to run this conference. So thank you, Alan, for both juggling a live surge and this event. So Alan, as Director of Surge, is dedicated to promoting and developing the outdoor arts and across the spectrum. He develops and delivers professional masterclasses, residencies, outreach programs across Scotland. And Surge is Scotland's only fully outdoor arts festival, and it's now in Glasgow. So if you're not already there, be there, or be square, be in a square, ideally. So Alan, over to you.
Hello, everybody. Thank you all for coming. I'm just organising myself. I'll be with you in a minute. Stand view slideshow. Stan, can you put the view slideshow on? Because I can't. I'm unfamiliar with I'm unfamiliar with a PC, I'm afraid. It's Gandalf. Yeah. Okay. So thanks all for coming. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about what we did last year, what we're doing now this weekend, and how that might affect what we do next year and the years in the future, and also try and give some thoughts about how we think it might be useful to make. We make our own work as well as presenting work, and sort of thoughts that we're having about how we might go about making work in the future on the back of what's been occurring. So first of all, if we just next slide, enter, there we go. I'm working a PC, it's amazing. So last year we had 3 weeks to move off, we weren't doing a festival at all, and then we asked Glasgow City Council if they would give us the money anyway, and they did, remarkably. And so we had 3 weeks to convert our pre-book festival to an online festival, which we sort of managed to do with some degree of success. However, what we tried to do with it all was to do it all as much as possible live, regardless of it being online. So we had that image there is of a company from Mallorca called Jetlack. They were performing on the streets of Mallorca in bars, which was quite upsetting when you were in Glasgow in your house. And we had stuff on beaches across Scotland, and various things were collaborations across Europe, which was quite interesting. So one of the things that was good about it was we had a sort of showcase, and having an international showcase online meant we could have sort of opera from Amsterdam at the same time, sort of interacting with a company from Wales and various other things occurring of a very sort of small scale, which wouldn't be affordable in a normal festival, just for people to have a look at what's going on.
Martin Danziger here. I got a call earlier about. Yeah.
So what's that noise? Anyway, so we also did a lot of things about investigating gaming last year and different ways of interacting online. So Mozilla Hubs we used a lot. We did an international residency, which the showcase came out of. We had a thing called Mozilla Hubs, which is those of you for Firefox. They developed an online platform where you can be in a sort of space that works like a gaming platform, which means it's a bit more like being in a space as opposed to being on a Zoom screen as we are now. And that was quite an interesting thing. It's improved quite a lot. It didn't work very well last year, but the platform itself rather than the residency. And then so from all the things we did, we ran 18 what's they called? cabarets online, all sorts of different things, including three-dimensional sculpture. And so by the end of the year, we sort of learned and determined which things were interesting for us going forward and which things weren't. This year, we've decided not to do it, with the exception of what we're doing right now. We decided to do nothing online on the grounds that we kind of feel that most people are sick of being online. But because of Brexit, we decided to do nothing. Because of Brexit partly, but largely to do with the pandemic. We're not having any international acts this year, because it's quite difficult to be here. However, next year we will be planning lots of international work, so that because of Brexit, precisely because of that reason. Because of the restrictions we were given this year, so normally we're in the merchant city, we put our things across normal streets where the roads are closed, whereas this year we're in an enclosed space in a park, which is a new format for Surge Festival. It's not a new format, it's a festival. But also we because we have to design our festival in February, March, so we decided, based on what the science was saying at the time, which varies regularly, to just do performances that were no more than 15 minutes long. So we were so some of the acts we were already interested in, we were talking to them about maybe shortening their acts. And this was just to do with people standing next to each other for a length of time. We decided to do more installation work because people tend to watch that for less amount of time. And so we created a program around restrictions without sort of diminishing the quality of the work, because we were choosing things that fitted with that. So it's more like a sort of performative art gallery than a traditional street theatre festival, if you like. Also, it's ticketed this year. It's free still, but it's ticketed this year, which is quite annoying, but a necessary evil, apparently. But I also think that something that I've been talking to a few people about is broadcast possibilities, which we're trying out this year. So hopefully, for those of you, which is presumably most people here who can't be there, if you go on our Facebook page, we should be transmitting 360 experience of being on our park at various points during the next couple of days. So if you keep an eye on our Facebook, that hopefully will give you a small amount of experience of what we're doing here. So that's what we're doing in the next 2 days. So I'll keep your eyes peeled. It might work and it might not. We'll see what happens. So next year. So last year we did everything online. This year we're doing nothing online. But Surges and myself personally have a great interest in the interaction between gaming and the online world and outdoor arts. And so we will continue to work digitally. And what's interesting about the digital thing is it's much more accessible in terms of the general population than it was a year ago because of the pandemic. So, because largely it was a younger audience who would engage in those sort of things. My mother and my father are now both able to operate a computer, which they couldn't do 15 months ago, and they're both in their 80s, which means we now have a much broader audience to be able to deal with online, which I think is really interesting. And also, I think the thing about online is engagement with an audience over a long period of time, which you can do through apps or online games, and this is something we're looking at developing. And I think that's something really interesting that should be taken forward beyond so rather than just forgetting about digital work, now we're entering a point where we don't need to be. It's good to think about what's useful about that and what we can do. And also what I mentioned earlier about international link-ups on a smaller scale. So rather than sort of, if you can do sort of small international collaborations to just try ideas out, or even try them just so they work online, because everybody is much more adept than they were before, artists and older people alike. So, and also because what I was saying about this year is, so we're in a park and we're doing smaller things and we're trying different things out. So we've been playing with format, and I think that's something we will take forward, is playing with format in the future rather than just repeating the same space and then things can become a little bit tired. But I don't think our festival is tired, but I think playing with format is a good thing. And playing with space and time across all of that. So, in terms of digitally, you can play it across a much broader time span than just a weekend festival. And then whereabouts you put things on, in what context, I think are all things that we will be looking at in the future. So in terms of making work, these are just thoughts. I'm not suggesting this is how you go about making work, just like they're just thoughts that we will be having at Surge that might be an interesting thing for you to do if you're a maker. So, I think there's a tendency, because of the whole pandemic thing, that people started doing digital with everything, which is clearly not advisable. But then also, as we're coming out, there might be a kind of, right, that's that gone. And I think making sure that you keep it in mind as a thing will be useful, and take on board what you've learned in the past rather than just go, right, fuck, that's over, let's move on. Use the challenges that you've had. Like we've got a smaller space, we're doing things in different ways, and I think, and all of you making work will all have had their own challenges. And I think, again, don't just discard those. Think, what about those is things that we could develop further. And I think another thing that's happened this year is people developing a variety of versions of their shows. And I don't think, in thinking about things, that's a bad idea. Like thinking of how you could do something online, or how you could do to a smaller level, and so it can fit into a lot of different formats. The long-term engagement thing digitally, I think, is really interesting. So I would be interested to talk to anyone who's interested in that sort of thing. And I think most programmers, people I've been speaking to, and people running festivals, are all having to do things in different ways. And I think they will all start thinking in different ways. So I would suggest trying to talk to the ones you know, or the ones you don't know, as early as possible. And I think fundamentally, because there's all these things that we've tossed up in the air, we've tried out over the last couple of years, I think the idea of play is even more important than ever. And that's all I've got to say.
Thank you so much, Alan, and really, really clear kind of trajectory from what happened last year, what you're going to do this year, tips for next year. I've been scribbling down for my own practice. Thank you. And so on to another, I shouldn't say mad festival programmer, but committed festival programmer, Patrick de Groote, who directs the Zomer van Antwerpen festival. Did go ahead last year, citywide festival of free events and a ticketed international theatre programme. He put 400 events on last year, despite COVID, and as a consequence, this year, and he again is in the middle of it all, this year the performances have doubled, so double commitment. So I look forward to hearing in just a moment from Patrick about his own reflections and thoughts for now and the future. Patrick.
Hi, and thank you for inviting me. I hope you understand my kind of English. If not, ask me later. We are a very stubborn festival, so we decided to do last year what we could do. We had to cancel some things. International tours got cancelled, the large scale events were not possible. It was sad, but we decided to focus on what we could do. Our festival is more like a summer season, running from mid-June until the beginning of September, so we have time. And most of our program is new work. So from late March, beginning of April on, we started discussing with all the artists how to adapt. And we adapted a lot of times between April and June. But we managed to save a lot of work. We managed to show it, and we managed to get a lot of audience. I'll show some pictures of how it looked like. We made a lot of signs. We changed over the 75 days because the measures and the rules and regulations changed, but we managed, and we managed the artists to adapt and the audience to adapt. What we did do and found out is that because of all the restrictions and things, we didn't want the artists to lose contact with the audience. So we kind of forgot frontal formats, and we returned to the most ancient and best way of seeing things, the circle. We work outdoor, we work in all kind of places, never in conventional places, always site specific. This is an old industrial hall where we had a dance show. When you're gathered with friends, and each one had a bench. It was a dance show. Many of the shows, because of the smaller audiences, played 2-3 times a day, played 3 to 4 weeks, And in that way, we managed to get thousands of people for each show in very small places. Sometimes we used also here circular, but individual shares for an outdoor show in the middle of the city with headphones. And people kept coming, whatever the weather. We introduced tables again to avoid the voids between the audience, so that everybody really was concerned outside as well as inside. We used, as you can see here, we used puppets to fill the empty seats so that people would not feel alone. This was a cinematic circus show. And that way we managed to give the people the feeling that they were really connected, that they could be close to the art. In Belgium, but we could do workshops. We did dozens of dance workshops, all extremely well attended, was the only way to dance. And we opened all our spaces for all kind of expressions. So we moved from being a scenic arts event to doing a lot of other things. This is a fashion show by young designers of African descent. So this was last year, lower capacities, but we said it was international, but we said that we could really discover new talents from closer by. Horrible financial outcome. We dropped from over 300,000 visitors in 2019 to about 80,000 people in 2020, but we got a lot of support. And we survived 2 lockdowns. So we planned, replanned, started, went into lockdown, planned, replanned, started again, went into lockdown, and so on. But we managed to pay all the artists if they played or not. And all this was a good training for our program 2021, which we are running now. And what we've seen is that a lot of artists have invented new, beautiful, ingenious ways to show work. There's hardly any frontal work this year. This is a picture of a show we're doing in the Antwerp sewer system, a theatrical walk, 20 people at a time, but runs various times a day, over 2 months, so we're reaching a lot of people. This is a show in a Ferris wheel, where you go into one of these things, I don't know how it's called, gondolas. You get a headset, you get a, how that's called, to look far, and then while listening to the story, you can follow it in the city. We have asked artists, we have these old buildings in Antwerp where we have these food scrapers next to the door. I don't know if it exists in Scotland, but here it's a forgotten thing. She talked to all the
It looks as if we've lost our wonderful speaker. Well, you'll just have to come into the discussion just to hear the end of that from Patrick. If we can't get him back, it would appear. And so it's not just festival directors, is it, who are committed? Clearly, the audiences are too. It's not just the Brits who come out in terrible weather. It's outdoor arts audiences and audiences of all kinds who just really, really want to connect. So hopefully we'll have an opportunity to hear a little bit more from Patrick later on and get him back again. But I'm, in the meantime, going to hand over to my co-host to introduce our next speaker.
Thank you, Stella. That's great. Okay, so throughout our lifetimes, many artists have sought to find a political context to their work. And for some, all art is political, and for others, art is an instrument for political change. Our two speakers approach art and activism from very different perspectives. The first speaker is Hilary Westlake. She's a director of large-scale site-specific and other performances. She founded Lumiere & Son theatre company with writer David Gale and produced over 50 original shows for theatres and other indoor and outdoor sites. And she's been an activist in numerous political campaigns over the years, and she is currently the chair of Artists for Palestine, UK. And I met Hilary many years, so long ago, I met Hilary, that she was actually in the second ever Zap Club event, the second ever presentation with her company, Lumiere & Son. And I've been following her way from before then and right to this present day. And she's going to give us an overview of political activism in her work and the work of others in theatre and performance. So over to Hilary.
Hello. Give me a second. Well, that's all of me really. But anyway, I'll expand a bit. In 1965, I joined the Hornsey branch of the International Socialists, and this heralded a life of involvement with political campaigns. The following year, I went to East 15 Acting School, and since it was originally connected to Joan Littlewood's theatre workshop, I thought politics would be central to everything, but unfortunately it wasn't. And my attempts to get students to go on strike or attend demos were never very successful. When I left East 15 in 1969, I performed with several alternative and physical theatre companies, including, I mean, they were deemed radical, certainly radical and experimental in their time. And these included Le Mama, the British branch of the New York company. And one of our shows, Merlin, was performed at dawn on Glastonbury's Pyramid stage, then a quarter of the size it is today. I then joined Interactions, the other company, and in the Pit, a 4-person show based on master-slave relationships, a 32-person audience watched through small windows in the center of a 3-section wall, which was dismantled as the relationships between the performers opened up. At the end, we did a workshop with the audience where they had to go in 2 lines facing each other and look into the eyes of their partner. And we would ask them sometimes very impertinent questions, but they were not allowed to answer. But we were gratified to find that many people found the experience surprisingly moving. I wanted to start directing and form Lumiere & Son Theatre Company with writer David Gale. We performed multidisciplinary forms, and although the work was intrinsically political, it did not deal specifically with current political issues. The political was translated into a psychoanalytical frame where the meaning could be located in the subtext or the visual or the choreography. And although we were funded by the Arts Council, there was little interest in the alternative theatre in the 70s and 80s, so you could pretty much do what you wanted, free from critical scrutiny. As it happened, this proved an ideal ground for developing our approach and aesthetic. Many of the venues and festivals we performed at were new, so there were few expectations. 2 early shows, Tip Top Condition, initially commissioned by a science fiction festival in Holland, had a group of aliens that came to Earth to observe and present human behavior in not an altogether positive way. This flexible and amusing show was repeated many times in different inside and outdoor locations with various sizes of casts. Similarly, Special Forces, a paramilitary ballet, where an elite commando unit taking their orders from Scandinavia were required to make the extreme sacrifice and kill themselves. After a while, we enlarged our basic group and worked with students and non-professionals of all ages, admittedly less from an ideological standpoint, but more as an opportunity of having larger casts and greater visual possibility. This involved creating shows for specific sites, and two that had the most explicit political historical content were firstly Deadwood, when 1985, it was about the destruction of the rainforest, and it was performed in Kew Botanical Gardens with a cast of over 100. For 4 nights, between 1,500 and 2,000 people were led through 24 hours in the life of a rainforest. In those days, health and safety was not concerned with performance, so we were able to do things that would not be possible today, like putting people unharnessed up tall trees or having long cable runs in the grass. A couple of years later, we did War Dance at Nottingham Castle. Set on the eve of the First World War, it reflected the nationalistic jingoism that encouraged so many young men to sign up. However, at that time, many other companies were formed for expressly socio-political purposes, and their work, the places they performed, and the audience they played to reflected this. Cast, cartoon archetypical slogan theatre's aim was to bring radical plays to working class audiences, and they performed in pubs, union meetings, and at working class socials. Other socialist companies included 784, named so because at that time 7% of the population had 84% of the wealth, probably not changed much, and Red Ladder, formerly Agitprop Street Players, was formed as a response to the revolutionary fervour of 1968. Women were frustrated at the lack of representation and roles for them. And so to redress the balance and to put their stories on stage, many women's theatre companies emerged in the 70s and 80s. Monsters Regiment formed as a collective in 1975 and presented new writing on a wide range of feminist subjects. Cheekily named Cunning Stunts, an alternative circus and cabaret troupe, displayed the absurdity of male behaviour, whilst flouting the prevailing glamorous image of women entertainers. Gay Sweatshop wanted to counteract the prevailing perception of homosexuality in mainstream theatre. And Black Theatre Cooperative produced plays by Black writers that portrayed life from a Black perspective in the UK. Many community and street theatre companies formed to present theatre to wider audiences, as well as involving members of the community in their shows. 2 leading exponents were the Bubble Theatre, who toured professional theatre to outdoor London boroughs in a tent, and Welfare State International, founded by former teachers and students from Bradford College of Art College. They proposed to make art as accessible as free dentures, spectacles, and coffins. Throughout my adult life, alongside my theatrical life, I was involved with many political campaigns. The Vietnam Solidarity Campaign, demanding that the United States get out of Vietnam, and urged our government to stop its support for America. At the very large demonstration in 1968, I was a steward, and clashes outside the US Embassy in Grosvenor Square brought out the police horses, brought them into action with loads of arrests and injuries. Wearing my armband, in fact, I was punched on the tube by obviously not a supporter. In 1970, the South African cricket tour was called off by the Home Secretary because of pressure from the anti-apartheid movement and threats from African and Asian countries to boycott that year's Commonwealth Games if the tour went ahead. In the aftermath of World Trade Organization protests in Seattle in 1999, Globalized Resistance was formed. I was the treasurer and part of the steering group. GR organised conferences around the UK with people like John Pilger and John Monbiot. And in 2001, we hired a train to take 500 people to the G8 summit in Genoa, where anti-globalization protester Carlo Giuliani was shot dead by the police. Over the next decade, GR continued to organise and participate in protests in the UK and abroad. In 2009, the exhibition signs of revolt, documented creative resistance and social movements since Seattle. In 1986, Mordecai Vanunu, an Israeli former nuclear technician and peace activist, who had revealed details of Israel's nuclear program to the British press, was kidnapped by Mossad, Israel's intelligence agency, and he was sentenced to 18 years imprisonment. I was part of the UK Vanunu Solidarity campaign and erected a benefit at Hackney Empire with well-known actors and writers. And later, I went to Israel to demonstrate outside Ashkelon prison, where Vanunu was incarcerated. Later, I was there as part of the welcoming for him when he was released. Despite worldwide solidarity campaigns, Vanunu had to serve his full sentence, 12 years of which was in solitary confinement. Since being released, he's not even allowed to leave Israel or speak to foreigners. I've been involved with Palestine solidarity events for decades, and in recent years have been the chair and treasurer of Artists for Palestine UK, a small cooperative launched in 2015. As well as publishing a booklet presenting the case for a cultural boycott of Israel, we have collected nearly 1,500 signatures of UK artists pledging not to accept professional invitations to Israel until it complies with international law and universal human rights. Over the years, I've been asked why I haven't brought the parallel worlds of my activities together and made political work. However, I found the language that would reflect the complexity of the proposed issues elusive, and not wishing to be simplistic, I preferred to approach the topics obliquely, allowing the audience to make connections and interpretations in relation to their preoccupations and affiliations. And as Jean-Luc Godard said, the problem is not to make political films, but to make films politically. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hilary. That was a wonderful and comprehensive overview. I've always been a great admirer of your work and the extraordinary subversive nature of it. And I wasn't aware actually the extent of your political activism. And I think that's absolutely fascinating. And I'm sure we'll look forward to your facilitation of the workshop on art and activism later on. It's interesting when you said that you wish to see the public come to their own conclusions or put their own view upon what they see. And so it's quite appropriate that we go on to talk to Doug Fransisco, who is a visual and performing artist and activist and a creative director with Invisible Circus and Boomtime Fair. He's a founder, member and trustee with the Art Space, Life Space charity and creator of the Red Rebel Brigades. And the Red Rebel Brigades have become for many the defining image of Extinction Rebellion. So over to Doug, please.
Hello. Thanks for inviting me along. I'm just battling with the coronavirus a little bit at the moment, so to excuse me if I'm not as articulate as normal. The Red Rebel Brigades began after I'd been in Panama at a festival with a circus show and working as an artist there, and I hadn't been anywhere to sort of a paradise location for many years, and was kind of really shocked and distressed once I went for a walk away from the festival site to find out that there was just tons of sea plastic washing up on the shore, and it was quite a sort of alarming and shocking thing to encounter in such a beautiful setting. So it kind of galvanized my feelings of needing to make the work that I did more meaningful, I guess, and sort of embrace the message of the environmental message in this case, which I've always done in my work, but yeah, it kind of just made me not want to kind of take on commercial work, especially, and focus more on meaningful work. So when I got back to England, it was just before the Extinction Rebellion spring uprising in London, and we decided we'd go with a circus kind of group. We kind of got all the Bristol crew together and wanted to go and do like circus parades. Maybe we had an ideas about doing some ocean themed stuff as well, because I'd just been working with all that stuff. And as a bit of an afterthought, really, I was like, I really wanted to do something with the, I used to as a street performer, we used to do a lot of stuff with big group shows of us doing everything like slow motion mime shows in white. And I travelled as doing it solo for a long time, but we'd also make these big group shows. And I sort of, the last time we'd done that was for the anti-Iraq war march in London, and I just had this idea to maybe do it in red, you know, do it in a different colour, and it was very sort of very off the cuff, really, and quite last minute. And so I went up to London to kind of check in with the XR team, all the people putting the stages together, and because I'm a ringmaster and I'm quite good with words, I sort of had the opportunity. There was this kind of like, oh, you could be in charge of this stage, or you'd be in charge of that, or but I didn't want to I didn't want to be in charge of anything either, but I also wanted to do something more personal, a bit more performative. But I kind of like almost let go of the idea, and one of my colleagues reminded me and was like, hey, we're going to do this red thing. And I was like, oh yeah. So I just put a call out on Facebook. I said, anyone got any red fabric? And someone donated like 10 bags of red fabric, red velvet. So we sort of had to start to make these costumes, and everyone came down to volunteer. So in 2 days, we'd made like 15 of these costumes or something. And off we went to London, and managed to hide them all on the pink boat that was going into Oxford Circus. And so we're kind of waiting there for that to arrive. And yeah, there's something about, I don't know, something about street performance and circus in the streets and stuff like that that just all seemed to chime in beautifully. So we had all these performers doing circus parades, and we just kind of improvised wildly, getting changed behind the boat once we could actually get the costumes off. So there's no real space or time to prepare much or think about it too much. And we kind of just put the costumes on. I did like one of my classic, 3-minute warm-up kind of moments. It was just really hectic, and lots of people, and the police were sort of coming and going. And so we just kind of, got the costumes on, a group of like 10 or 12 of us, and set off. And, and immediately just had this like, well, initially just had this wall of photographers for like the first half an hour just in front of us, which is a bit, gets a bit annoying after a while as well. So yeah, it just the sort of the power of it, and people being hit really emotionally by it, because it's very slow. We move really slowly, and it's you follow the lead, so you follow the person in front of you, so it's very synchronized and very mournful and very slow and peaceful. And it had this kind of calming effect on people, and emotional effect, and it was as interesting away from the protest areas as it was on the front lines, if you like, because people were just hit by it. So I was struck by how powerful it was to just affect people emotionally. And I guess, in retrospect, thinking about it as well, it can't be misquoted or misunderstood so much, you know what I mean? It has since been misrepresented in the press, but initially I'd noticed that the reporting on the rebellion on the first morning was all about pigeonholing it and stereotyping, and finding, they're interviewing people in like rainbow jumpers and crazy hats and stuff like this to be like, these are the protesters, this is the kind of people that do this, like these crazy environmental hippies that are closing down London. And so all of a sudden that narrative in the press was changed, and you had the images like these of these sort of emotive red characters started flooding all of the front pages and news feeds everywhere. So that was one of the most sort of I suppose empowering sort of things about it, that I noted how we changed the narrative, and suddenly it was a totally emotive artistic image that went out with the rebellion, instead of just like, here's some hippies protesting about the planet again, you know what I mean? Which is and it was interesting how you can manipulate that so the press will pick up anything. They just want a great photo for their thing. That's all. So I was struck by the power of being able to do that. Excuse me. And yeah, very quickly it went from just our troop doing it to just people kind of getting involved, because we were there for like a week or 10 days or something. And yeah, we managed to close the city down for like 7 days, and it was quite chaotic trying to find out where to be when. So we just stopped bothering and just started improvising wildly and going out wherever, and turning up at really. There's a moment on Waterloo Bridge when there's a lot of people locked onto one of the vehicles there, and a huge police presence, and it was just really tense. And we just sort of went. That was the first time we sort of lined up in front of the police, and it just sort of de-escalated the situation and humanized the whole situation as well. So it made the police kind of respond emotionally also, which was a bit of a leveler. So that was a really interesting effect of it as well, that you suddenly took out that confrontation from the situation. So I have no idea how long. Actually, you have to remind me when my time's going to be up.
You'll find out another 2 minutes.
And yeah, and so it then just started growing wildly, and more and more people would come and perform with us, and it was very accessible for everybody. So you didn't have to be a performer. Initially, it was just performer, then just all sorts of different people started doing it, and different age, performing experience, which was very empowering for people. And we're also just unstoppable, just this wafting kind of floating, floating along without, and not speaking, being silent. So people just opened doors, like security guards just didn't know what to do, and we just like open gates. We found that anywhere we went, we could just kind of float in there, and like I said, security would be like, oh, and we took over stages and all sorts of stuff, just completely improvised by it, and people just didn't know how to deal with it or how to stop it really. Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of really great quotes. And someone heard the sergeant when he was briefing the constables on the bridge after one of the big arrests attempts. He's like, okay, that's all. Oh, whatever you do, don't arrest any of those bloody red people. So like we sort of got the nods at the police were just like, God, don't touch them, because it'd be such a terrible photo opportunity. And speaking to one of them, a police officer in Parliament Square afterwards, he was like, I'd rather be punched in the face by a Millwall supporter than stared at by you lot. So it had a real kind of power, and strangely, like you could see the police were even getting a little bit weepy. Do you know what I mean? So it had the same effect on them as it did on everybody else, which was quite emotional. And from there, we kind of realized, someone asked if they could take their costume home to Finland, one of the costumes. So we sort of realized it was going to spread. So we kind of knocked out these kind of how-to videos really quickly. Rough how to make costumes, how to do the thing. And suddenly it just started kind of spreading all over the country to start with, and then all over Europe and all over the world eventually. Now there's troops in, I don't know, like 3 or 4 in America and Australia, in Japan, Israel, Palestine, Portugal, France, India, Spain, Germany, blah, blah, blah. It just goes on. And so it's just kind of, it just kept spreading, became this kind of viral thing. And obviously, as these things spread as well, they can dissipate and dilute. So we tried really hard to keep the quality of the performance up and get the videos out there and kind of engage with all the different groups to kind of make them try and hold the thing well. And with the new laws that are coming or are in nearly, I don't know if this is going to, like, now you're not allowed to protest if it's annoying or something like that, isn't it? Or noisy. I was like, are we going to be the only form of protest allowed? Which is kind of a frightening and amusing situation. And then most recently we did the G7 down in Cornwall, and again it had a very a powerful effect, a very beautiful effect. But this time it went viral because we were accused of being Satanists, working for Boris Johnson, performing arcane rituals on the beach in St. Ives, which is a total kind of clickbait kind of, it's reported on some awful website that has no interest in actual news. But it's interesting to see how they can try and undermine these things with such ridiculous kind of angles. Because there was a photo of Boris Johnson's dad who turned up at an XR camp at one point with some red people. So they're like, Boris Johnson's father is performing satanic rituals on the beach in St. Ives. But yeah, that's probably good, isn't it?
That's brilliant, Doug. Well, thank you very much to have such a powerful explanation of an extraordinarily powerful performance. And thank you particularly for coming to us when I know you're not feeling at all well and with COVID. So we'll look forward to you and Hilary telling us more and in the discussion that's going to take place in the workshop. Thank you. So now I'll hand back to my co-host, Stella Hall.
Hello, everybody. And we're moving on now to the final set of presentations on our third strand, our third theme, Europe and beyond. And let's look at that beyond as much as we look at Europe when we're moving into our discussions. Because although Brexit has meant real practical and logistical challenges, creative challenges in making work in Europe, there are other countries globally with whom we should be maintaining links. And our first speaker, Liz Pugh of Salford-based Walk the Plank, has certainly been doing that since we've seen the company's extraordinary visual work opening cities of culture all over Europe. But her work as a canny creative in 2013, the British Council, where she worked in Ukraine and was then invited to Nigeria and elsewhere, has meant that her work really is truly global. And in her introduction, she says her role, though, wherever it is the same as it's always been, to produce groundbreaking work that invites people to collaborate or connect or celebrate in new ways and surprise themselves in the process. So she says, Walk the Plank has an insatiable appetite for creative risk. She herself certainly does. And listening to Hilary Westlake talk about that wonderful history of art and activism, every company of which we showed in Manchester in the Green Room, the Arts Centre I co-founded in the 80s, Liz Pugh herself was also as an early performer in that cohort in a company called Red Stockings, which I think betrays her roots. Liz, over to you.
Thank you so much, Stella and Neil, for organising this and inviting me to speak today. So Walk the Plank, as Stella indicated, has been making work, civic and community celebrations in public space for many years. And till 2013, I think, like many companies, we saw the opportunity to be invited to an international festival as a way of going abroad, meeting new people, but it was also, it felt sort of high status and sexy, and I think that experience of flying in and being part of an international festival was an extremely privileged position, and one which, when I started working in Ukraine, at the same time as Stella was in Kazakhstan, the experience of being embedded in a place for 6 extraordinary months. Ukraine went through a revolution while I was there, but I think that idea of working with people in different ways was rooted then for me. And as well as so I've become personally more interested in building, in working with people on the ground and building the capacity of creative practitioners from professional and non-professional backgrounds, rather than presenting work. And I think one of the things that the pandemic has done is accelerate, for many of us, things that were happening anyway, or amplifying that. As Stella said, I have worked with the British Council, training festival managers in West Africa and in the Caribbean, amongst other places. And I'll come back to what that experience has left me with. But I just wanted to talk initially about a Creative Europe project that we have been part of, because it maps what has happened in the pandemic. My timing, sorry, I've got my timer here. We did our first Creative Europe project probably 6 years ago now. It was a project built on transnational mobility. It was about training schools. It was about the democratization of outdoor arts and encouraging independent practitioners in places that were going to be European capitals of culture to quickly gather together, organize, and try and take advantage of some of the benefits that a European capital of culture title can give people. Previously, it was always the institutions were very quick off the mark, and we felt that actually giving independent practitioners a way of getting off that starting line through building their own international networks was desirable. So we did a number of editions of the School of Spectacle, and more recently we have been involved in something called the School of Participation, which is the same idea. It's a transnational training school that brings people together from nine European and 2 non-European countries. I say suppose European in terms of the European Union. And of course you will immediately hear that idea of transnational mobility, of course, has had to be completely rethought as a result of the pandemic. The cities we're working with are in Lithuania, Bulgaria, Serbia, but also in Armenia, in Estonia, in Hungary, and in Ireland. The first iteration in Plovdiv happened exactly as we planned. It was December 2019, and people travelled, they lived and worked together for 10 days, and came from all of those different places and arrived in Bulgaria. And at the end of the training school, we worked with our hands, with each other, and made an event in public space to celebrate the International Day of Volunteers, working with volunteers from the Plovdiv European Capital of Culture. Then the pandemic hit and we had to rethink everything. So the next school in Kaunas ended up being, we called it blended. Actually, I think we were probably still working out what blended meant. It was actually a sort of funny alliance of online and offline, and the the integration of that was not hugely successful. And I think I had been resisting the idea of making something that was so deeply rooted in hands-on learning by doing, that the idea that we might try and create the same impact through the digital space didn't appeal to me, so I didn't pay it enough attention. I think as a result of doing it not so well, when we came to plan Novi Sad, which we had hoped would be a mixture of online and offline, actually we had to make the decision 3 weeks before for the whole school to only be online, and that was incredibly liberating. It meant the experience was much better, and we have to remember at this point there was 22 people, many of whom were in lockdown, so they weren't actually able to leave their rooms or their homes. Some places were more opened up, other places were going into lockdown. The Serbia, as the host nation, was in serious lockdown, and we had to rethink our speakers, as well as fantastic people from the Serbian arts community in Novi Sad. We were also able to invite speakers like Jay Jordan from the Laboratory of Insurrectionary Imagination that many of you will know about, and we were able to go beyond the European borders. We had Heba El Sheikh, some of you will know Heba, who talked to us about the experience of community arts practice in Egypt, and that moment of opening people up to the realities and challenges of the world of arts and cultural practice beyond the relative luxury of Europe. And I know that Europe is 28 countries with wildly different experiences, but I think one of the things that we have to interrogate is our Fortress Europe mentality, and we have to think carefully about what European identity means and who it excludes. And I know, speaking to people in Scotland, you know, you are interrogating that debate all the time about national identity and what your European identities might be. So that was Novi Sad online. We're going to do 2 more of these schools, one in Coventry in July, where we have no one travelling to the UK because the quarantine restrictions are now so significant at the moment for people coming from other countries. It's quite challenging. That's my timer going off, so I know I've got to bring this to a conclusion. And in Groote, we're looking at the experience of migrants and refugees, working with a local organisation there, and thinking about who can travel, who has to travel, who is forced to travel. And I think what we're experiencing through the pandemic is all sorts of restrictions around travel that perhaps make us question those things differently. I just want to finish by saying that I think that we have to look for the positives that come out of the pandemic experience, and I think one of those is reaching beyond Europe, looking at within our communities. Many of us live alongside people who have connections beyond Europe, whether that's the African diaspora, whether that's India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, whether that's China or Southeast Asia, Hong Kong, Taiwan. And I would encourage you all, when you are planning projects and thinking about your landscape locally, think about who there is connected globally and how might you build those connections through the projects that you are imagining. And we can talk more about this in the workshop that we're doing in a bit. So thank you for your time, and I'll see some of you in the workshop.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Liz, for that thoughtful and very honest talk. And always good to hear somebody say, I wasn't really interested in digital. I didn't really take much notice of it, and therefore didn't actually do it very well. And I now realise what to take forward. But one really salient point, just for us all who are in this sector so good at thinking about who is and isn't included, who is and isn't part of our offering, that we don't always think about the realities and challenges, as Liz outlined, of arts and cultural practice beyond the relative acknowledged luxury that we have in Europe. And the call at the end there for us to think about those communities that might be around us that we can connect with leads us on to our next speaker, Amaya Dent, who is working on the Little Amal project, which starts on the Turkish-Syria border, Gaziantep, which I visited as part of my kind of creative time with the British Council. So where there really is an extraordinary challenge for migrants and refugees, those, and we think about those who can travel and those who have to travel. So that extraordinary journey across the continent to the Manchester International Festival and beyond is an extraordinary manifestation incorporating handspring puppets who first came to the UK via the London International Festival of Theatre, and they've gone on their own creative journey since then, from South Africa to all over the world because of those introductions. But Amaya, really looking forward to hearing more from you about that journey and perhaps something of your own journey too.
Great, thanks Stella. Just checking everybody can hear me and see me. Great. Okay, I'm just going to get up some slides if I can navigate. Okay, this should be good. Can everybody see that? See my slides? Great. I'll just make a note of the time, 11:15. So I am Amaya. I am a producer for The Outdoors. I sit on the board of Outdoor Arts UK, and I'm currently working on this international project, The Walk, as the UK producer. So I'm just going to tell you some more about the project, and then I'm going to do a bit of reflecting on my experience of working on this alongside my European producer peers, and also a bit about trying to pull this off, given the context as well. There we go. So that's our route. The Walk is, in a nutshell, a giant travelling festival of art and hope that unfolds around Little Amal. Little Amal is a Syrian refugee. She is 9.5 when she sets out on her journey from Aleppo. She's an unaccompanied minor, and she is looking for her mother as she makes her way across Europe to the UK. And her mother left Aleppo looking for something better for her family. Amal is also a 3.5 metre tall giant puppet made by the Handspring Puppet Company in collaboration with Good Chance Theatre, who came to be in the jungle refugee camp in Calais. Amal is puppeteered by 4. She has a stilt walker inside of her, balancing on her knees and carrying her upper half. Inside that puppeteer operates something called the harp, which is a series of strings and pulleys that operate Amal's face and her eyes. And that very detailed movement making her incredibly responsive. Amal doesn't speak. And there's a puppeteer on each of her arms using a rod, and a puppeteer supporting her back as well. And this is clearly a very international project. It's artistically led from Palestine, where our artistic director, Amir Nizar Zouabi, is based. And our model is that we have a lead producer in each of the territories that Amal is walking through. So one for Turkey, one for Greece, one for Italy, one for France and Switzerland and Belgium, and then one for the UK. So that's me. And what that means is that I'm working with all of our lead partners nationally, right across 10 cities, to help hone the live events that will happen around Amal arriving in each place, to help breathe them into being. And clearly international travel is an integral part of this project. And clearly, owing to COVID, that is something that has been incredibly challenging, and has demanded that as a company spread out across the world, we have a real muscle of resilience, of flexibility, and of optimism whilst pushing to deliver this. A couple of weeks ago, we relocated at short notice a month's worth of our UK rehearsal period to Turkey, because the main bulk of Handspring are based in South Africa, and they were on the red list. And of course, they were integral to breathing Amal into being with our company. And so it's back to remote working for me now, with most of the core company over in Turkey in a rehearsal room in a ballroom, getting ready for the journey, which will begin on the 27th of July. Amal will set off from Gaziantep. And I have to say that actually the practice that we as an international company had at working remotely because of COVID, I think has actually afforded us even better communication than would have existed before, and a real spirit of unity, because actually because of COVID and lockdown and those things, in the end it didn't matter if you were based in Kilburn or in Brixton or in Jaffa or in Madrid. The way in which we had to learn to communicate effectively and honestly online has acted as a real equalizer amongst us wherever we're located. And that was a really unexpected learning and a real positive for trying to pull off a project like this, because we're going to be communicating remotely for the duration of it. And in fact, some of us who have worked closely together will actually never meet in person during the course of this. So it's strange settings. And I have to say that as a UK-based producer working with my European peers, trying to pull this off in tandem in such different contexts, such different country contexts, has been brilliant learning, about the nuts and bolts of the producer process and how that varies globally. Things like contracting and heads of terms documents, and our initial idea that we might be able to use one central model across the route, that had to shift. And I really was reminded how much us Brits love black and white. We love writing. We love things to be down on paper in order to feel safe. And actually that attitude doesn't necessarily proliferate across other countries in Europe. In some places that feels unnecessary and a bit oppressive. And so it was interesting navigating that across the European producer teams. Also, it's cast a great light on the bureaucracy of of public space and of working in the streets in the UK, something I already knew but have been greatly reminded of, and particularly within London and particularly within central London. And I have to say, it's really the experience, again, navigating that with my European producer peers, also working in other capital cities, it's really whet my appetite for going in and working in the streets elsewhere, where perhaps there is slightly less red tape to get entangled in. So this, I'm just going to talk about working with artists across Europe. This image here is by a Syrian artist called Khaled Al-Waraya that we are working with. He is a refugee. He's based in Paris. He's part of the Lands in Exile programme, which is a wraparound programme for the walk. And basically, it's a programme of Syrian artists who are either currently still based and working in Syria or who have relocated across Europe as refugees. And the programme commissions them to make large-scale, ambitious artworks that reflect on exile, which will be part of the walk's wider programme right across Europe. What this programme looks to do is to take that idea of changing the narrative around refugees and asylum seekers and place that narrative firmly back into the hands of artists seeking sanctuary across Europe. As a project, the walk believes absolutely that ambitious artistry is one of the central threads to reframing the narrative around refugees. And what the walk looks to do is to champion what we gain from migration across Europe, not what we lose. And the walk absolutely insists that a rich cultural landscape is one of these absolutely invaluable gains. I'm very excited about the work with Khaled. It's going to be part of our London procession. He's going to make some large-scale visual content. Oh, that's the wrong. Here we are. Okay. Just briefly, I know that time is of the essence. In terms of the challenges of pulling this off in the UK, I'm just going to talk briefly about navigating the landscape that exists nationally around sanctuary seekers and their reception. And I think we're all aware that the landscape is very, very different depending on where you're working geographically. And I have to say that what I have discovered is that a feeling of hostility is a feeling that exists everywhere, in pockets, and overwhelmingly a feeling of welcome and of good intention and of positivity around communities that are seeking sanctuary is also something that exists everywhere. The narrative is complicated everywhere, and some places continuously take the rap for being bastions of hostility. This is a picture of the Dover Cliffs, of the Led by Donkeys large-scale projections that happened there around Brexit. And I wanted to use this picture because the way that the walk has worked is that we have formed community coalitions in each place to co-create the live activities that will happen there with local people. And overwhelmingly, what I found when we began to work in Dover was a real atmosphere of caution and a fragmented feeling that had been left behind as part of the legacy of artworks like this that have potentially happened without effective consultation and conversation happening with the local community there. And people feeling really cautious that were we just another project coming in to sort of make a point out of toxic attitudes that exist in these places, and navigating those sensitivities and the incredible minutiae that exists in this country nationally has been a really interesting challenge to breathing this work into being. And yeah, I was reflecting on that in the context of this symposium, really. And I have to say that better understanding the socio-political context around refugees that exist throughout the UK, but working with local people to find ways to campaign for change that really works in a bespoke and locally owned way for every single place across our international route, and indeed within the UK, has overwhelmingly been the real pleasure of doing this work, and I think will be the lasting legacy of the walk. So I won't go on for too much longer.
1 minute, Amaya, 1 minute.
No, I'm done actually. I'm just going to show you if I can make it work. I can't. My buttons don't work anymore. But anyway, thank you. We can talk more in. Oh, there it is. There's me and Amal. People keep telling me that I look like her, so I just thought I'd show you that in the rehearsal room. Yeah, thank you. Over to you guys.
Thank you very much, Amaya, and a huge amount of food for thought there. And I see in the chat Liz Pugh asking, is there always a choice to be made between confrontation and consultation in terms of making effective change happen? Let's not answer that in the next minute and a half. Save it for the discussion groups. But what a fantastic project that really does bring all of our themes today together, and really interesting to reflect on Hilary's mention of the early days of activism, where public space was open to all and things could happen, and where we've got to now with oppressive contracts that actually can block us achieving things. So perhaps loosen up, everybody. Might be our message if we can actually do that. So placing narrative in the hands of artists seeking sanctuary, focusing on what we gain, community coalitions to co-create. Huge amount of food for thought there for the later discussion. So I'm going to hand over to Neil to introduce those discussions, and I look forward to seeing some of you in our group and others in other groups, and hope you all have a fantastic next set. But Neil. Thanks, Amaya. So I'm not seeing Neil. Let me carry on then and let you all know that there's now oh, here he is, great.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I was waiting to be unmuted there. It's a wonderful series of presentations. Thank you very much to all the presenters, and very much looking forward to the breakouts that are going to occur now. So the way this is working is that we've got about 5 minutes to use as you wish, and then the workshops are going to start at 11:35. So if you go back to the digital.surge.scot page that you were on before, you'll see that there are the 3 breakout groups that you can choose to go into: European Connections, Presenting Work, and Activism. And those breakouts are going to last for 30 minutes. And at the end of that, we're going to come back for a very short session, the final plenary session, when the facilitators on those 3 breakouts are going to report back to us. Okay, so thank you very much. Enjoy your 4-minute break. And we'll see you in one of those workshop groups now. Thank you. Okay, I'm just going to start talking while we're having everybody join us. I can see Mikey is back and Stella is back, is she? And is Hilary back? Stella's there, I can see it, and Hilary. Okay, well, welcome back, everybody. That was, I had the fortune and the misfortune to be going from one group to the other, and it was fortune because it was fascinating to see these conversations continuing, and unfortunate because it's incredibly frustrating to have to go in and out of them. And I also suspect it was frustrating for you all because they're such important topics, and I got the sense that they were really just launching into the next part of the topic. So apologies that we couldn't give you more time, but I think if we'd given you more time, maybe people would have stayed so long. So who knows? It's always an issue with these symposia. So what we're going to do now, just briefly, I'm going to ask Stella and Hilary and Mikey, the 3 facilitators, to give us a bit of a feedback as to what was going on in their workshops. And I'd like to invite Stella to kick off. She needs to be unmuted.
sorry, I hadn't realised. I said it was a brilliant group. We had a really lively, practical conversation about what we learned during COVID about producing, and the very different audiences that emerge when we go online. We didn't get on to talking about how we retain those, or how we manage that expansion. But before we started, we had the pleasure of hearing the end of Patrick's talk, and just getting a sense of the journey that artists might take with a festival that runs for 2 months, so that creating new work, you've got that experience of refining as audiences see you and developing a piece of work over time, which rather chimed with that notion of trying out. We heard earlier on about trying out work, and trying from Alan, trying new ways of working and not necessarily having to have a finished product. We talked quite a bit about what we learned about the flexibility and adaptability of artists, but also of teams who had to, we didn't use the word pivot, but that was the word of the year last year, pivoting to find new ways of working. But as was pointed out, particularly by Christiana Eigner of Findhorn, just watching out for that constant state of high alertness and being ready to flex, and what effect that might have on the mental health of the team, as well as artists, as well as audiences. So a lot for us as producers to be thinking about. We heard about NEAT and the volunteers who run their small venues, and the challenges of getting them to think outside the box that is their venue, and how when they did do that, it really reaped rewards when they went from the village hall to the bigger space so that they could socially distance. So finding ways to encourage those small volunteer promoters to try something new. From Orkney, we heard about new ways of working online and then live, and the tail that a piece of work initially that would initially have been booked just in a primary school could have, and that those long tails, those more expansive ways that artists have engaged with workshop packs, with online editions, with follow-ons, and the value for that in audiences getting a deeper dive. Orkney now becoming a bit of a testbed for what they started last year. We heard from an artist perspective, particularly a digital artist perspective, that producers and presenters first going into that area didn't necessarily anticipate the cost, the time, and the investment that digital artists put into their work, because it was a new field. And so there was a bit of personal subsidy going on last year from digital artists that we need to recognise and acknowledge, and celebrate the contribution that they made, and be ready to budget better in the future. Other artists, Andrew in particular, talked about how they had to think again about work that had been live in the past that might have gone online, and those shorter attention spans. So the whole story was very much about hyper-awareness, hyper-flexibility, but also a kind of, there was a joy, I think, in learning something new and developing new ways of working and new ways of engaging, and certainly a lot to be taken forward.
Thank you very much, Stella. Very succinct, and it sounds a very exciting workshop to be part of. Can I now hand over to Hilary? Hilary Westlake.
Yes. Well, let me think. Initially, everybody talked about their relationship with the subject, art and activism, and well, I asked them what was their interest, and people described the sort of work that they do, and I think, as it was generally established in the different experiences that people were saying about the work that they created or they wanted to create, that this broad area of work is intrinsically political, because it takes work, it takes performance to a whole range of situations and countries, which in itself has got a socio-political role. I suppose what I asked a few times was to see the extent that current political affairs are sort of affect or inspire or can govern what work people produce. And I think we didn't really get round to answering this, but I think what was very clear was something, you know, the strength of the image that Doug has created with his red people, if that's all right. Yes, red people, that's what they are. And just the commitment and the, you know, when he talks about it, it seems that it's such a simple thing. He just got a bunch of material and a bunch of people and sent them out. But, you know, as I think we all appreciated, that it takes an enormous, you've got to have the idea. It's the idea that's important. I mean, we have the desire to do things, but you know, it's getting the idea, you know, and a good idea, because there's loads of ideas out there. So how do you cut through with your little corker of an idea and make an impact? And I think that this is what all of us are seeking, and certainly I think all of the people in the workshop, if I'm not misrepresenting them. Nothing was resolved. Questions came up. What is art? What is activism? Artivism is a term that's used occasionally. But I think in that time, and I think we were a fairly disparate group, brought together by perhaps a common interest, but not in our experiences. So the questions asked about what is, you know, what is political, what is activist art, but I don't think we got any answers. Doug, do you want to add to that? Anything that I've left out? Can Doug be unmuted, please? Who's controlling?
Mm-hmm.
There we go.
Oh, there we go. I mean, that was a good summary, to be honest. Yeah, it brings up more questions. We brought more questions and answers, but I thought that was quite a healthy kind of response in a way, and that people are seeking to put that meaning into their work, and to put that into the public realm in the various forms. And we, like I said, we were quite a lot of different people in that group. So I think, yeah, I think what you said, crucially, it's about your idea, the idea really, and having the idea and taking it out there, and maybe yeah, the point that came up was about not seeking permission or funding necessarily, or all that stuff, you know what I mean? Just kind of going for it and doing it. And I think that's a really valid thing in this time. That's certainly where, which drove me. I was just kind of quite focused on that. I wanted to do that, and I didn't need anybody's, like, it was quite frustrating trying to interact with XR. We actually had no interaction with XR as an entity really, and that is very much part of their modus operandi anyway. There is no leaders and stuff, but it's incredibly frustrating trying to coordinate with XR. So we just stopped, and it all just started working perfectly, and we'd be at the right place at the right time.
Yeah.
So the less we tried to organise it, the better it ran. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
To the point where I was like, yeah, let's let go of structure and trying to organise it too much, and then get out there and do it.
Thank you very much, Hilary and Doug. That's great. Continue to inspire. And just quickly now, we'll have to go to Mikey. We're running a bit late, so Mikey, could you tell us how your session went?
Yeah. Am I muted? Yeah. Yes, thank you. That was really good. I was going to quickly, I'm going to do quickly, don't worry now. I think that's interesting, a couple of things just picking up from there, which came into ours, which we didn't really have time to develop, were evolution of structures, as Doug's saying, about when you do it, how you do it, and also festivals, as Stella touched on. I think we need to be brave as organisers and artists, and we can change our structures, whether that be global, local, digital, a festival in 5 parts over 12 months rather than all in one weekend, whatever. We can do what we like, can't we? And we should be brave. Internationalism, we made an executive decision right at the beginning, because didn't have much time, to not talk about touring, not to talk about Brexit, not talk about all the politics around that, because those things will resolve themselves. Let's just focus on why we are international, and maybe why we need to be even more urgently. There's some lovely conversation from the perspective of, from an artist's perspective, in terms of working in landscape, working with natural resources as a metaphor for migration, as well as a artwork and installations and experience in itself, but also immediately starts touching on migration, which of course touches on internationalism. At the moment, there is a bit more insularity is the wrong word, but because of COVID and the pandemic, it has been and it is a little more difficult to be collaborating international, obviously, at the moment. So I think there is a sense that people's projects are sort of homing in, and then I'm really looking forward to when they start going out again, when it's easier to do that. In terms of why certain artists or producers or individuals want internationalism, connectivity comes up an awful lot in different ways, from personal perspectives or from organisational perspectives, which some may see as strategic. Connectivity is really important to us and as creatives. Really very, very powerful comment about borders sometimes do help people. So we need to look at things from different perspectives. Maybe borders aren't always a bad thing, which I thought was a very pertinent point that Liz made. Again, look, talking about the walk, that amazing project that we heard about earlier on, how, what an extraordinary, urgent, moving, beautiful piece of work, and to present that at this times and the challenges along it. Really interesting the way that Amaya talks about community coalitions and forming coalitions, because we often talk within a network called In Situ about the differences between public space. We work in public space. Let's get rid of this outdoor arts narrative. It's public space, therefore it's owned by lots of different members of the public. So if the arts silos itself too much with its own audiences and partners and collaborators, is that somehow disingenuous? And what I think Amaya talks beautifully about is how she's working closely in Dover with not just arts organisations or even humanitarian organisations, but also the people that cut the grass on top of the verge, on top of the cliffs. So that ownership of that project as it arrives in that place is very different, because the community coalition she speaks of is not just from the arts. And I think when we work internationally, that's the opportunity we all have. Our partners are not just arts organisations, they're also architects, they're also humanitarian, they're academic, they're many things. So when we think internationally, don't think too narrow in terms of arts. Let the politicians do the politics. We need to look at our own society and our own othering and our own class prejudices as much as we need to look outwards. And that's something that came through a lot, really beautifully. And then we touched a bit on digital and listened to what you just said about the other summaries. I think there's something very interesting about internationalism and digital planes, these different planes we're now working on, because when and where does a show begin and when and where does it end? If we can also have live forms and digital forms. There you go. There ends my summary.
Mikey, thank you very much indeed. Could we bring up Stella, my co-host, so that we can conclude our double act? Going to ask Stella very briefly to, forgive the briefness, round up, and then if Martin can be ready, we'll bring him up as well.
Thank you, Neil. And what a privilege it's been to hear so many positive, active voices today. It's reminded me of activism, CND, street theatre, Rock Against Racism. Those were my early days and my generation's early days. And seeing that energy coming forward around Black Lives Matter and Climate Coalition, climate emergency and all kinds of campaigns is extraordinary. But I'm mindful of Hilary's points really early on, when she said why she doesn't necessarily always put her politics into her work. It's because it's nuanced. It's because there are so many layers, and that that work that reflects our own political perspectives might not necessarily emerge at the time that activism is happening. That doesn't mean we're not activists. So extraordinary examples of work going on under really challenging conditions. And I think we can be proud and what's been achieved, and of the learnings and what's being taken forward. So here's to new connections, new relationships, and reforging those existing ones as we go forward into the speed dating, hopefully looking at our friends, neighbours, audiences, fellow artists, fellow promoters in a different way, without expectations, but wanting to collaborate and wanting to partner.
Thank you very much, Stella, and thank you very much for all the presenters, some of whom came to us under really difficult circumstances, and thank you for all your time in preparing for this and making these wonderful presentations. And thank you very much also to Serge, to Alan and Stanley, and all your technical crew for making this work. We're very much looking forward to the next section. So if Martin is available, we are now going to have